Hi everyone. So I did a summary for Between Iraq and a Hard Place in the Coercion and its Fallout book. So this is the chapter introduction. It starts off with talking about punishment, escape, and avoidance, and how they usually occur together, not in isolation from one another. When we punish, we create escape avoidance behavior for the people we intend to punish, so they may run away from us or avoid all interactions with us as the punishers, as we are the punishers. We as humans continue with punishment behavior when we see that it is effective, but can ultimately destroy what we initially were. So rulers can become tyrants, law enforcement individuals such as prison guards become ruthless monsters. Usually in prisons, mercy is not shown, so they see that punishment works and they take it to a whole new level. So ultimately, punishment, although sometimes somewhat effective, is a very powerful and dangerous weapon as it does more harm than good. So the lab rat experiment that was talked about in the beginning of this chapter is that the rat learns to get food by pressing the lever, but does not get food immediately every time the lever is pressed. On occasion, there is a shock that lasts for 1/10 of a second, but it is unavoidable, and the rat keeps pressing the lever because it has learned that eventually the food will be given to it. This is equivalent when our bosses summon us to their office in 5 minutes to discuss why our sales have gone down. We face an unavoidable shock, but we can still continue to do our job and make sales even though there is some type of lingering anxiety within us, wondering what our boss will tell us, or if he'll reprimand us or cut back on our whatever it is that he's given us extra. He can cut back. He can demote us. He can lower our salary, so that temporary incapacitation can take over us during our work time. We can still continue to make sales, talk to our employees, but that lingering anxiety is still there. After a while, the rat will avoid the lever once he hears the tone that will follow up with a shock. It is paralyzed with fear, just as we are when our boss informs us of its disappointment affecting our performance. We learn to be anxious, and this is called conditioned suppression. So the bottom line is that this behavioral depression can lead to the cessation of productivity, focus, and functioning effectively. Nature's inescapable threats can also hinder our ability to function normally, like when there's a tornado coming. We cannot function to our fullest capabilities. We have to remain locked in the cellar. We can't communicate with people. We probably can't eat or drink or anything like that. So that hinders our ability to function normally. Unavoidable threats from people can have just as a debilitating effect as the ones from nature. The example that they used was the secretary's mother is ill and is unable to focus and gets threatened that if she messes up one more task, she is fired. This leads to even greater anxiety and is unable to perform and therefore gets fired. Just wait until your father gets home is another common one. This common threat thrown upon a child results in tremendous behavioral anxiety. The child is unable to do anything else but anticipate his father's reaction and therefore stays out of trouble. So as parents, we use punishment with the intention of teaching our kids a lesson, but what we do not realize is that the anxiety that they end up feeling as a result of the threats is so debilitating. We may end up feeling guilty and try to undo our threats by being playful, but the child is already in so much distress to respond to your attempts to repair what you've done. So absence of adaptive behavior leads to a more consistent is the most consistent feature of depression. When coercion is the preferred technique to deal with unwanted behavior, like in prisons and the military, it becomes a breeding ground for depression. Sometimes we may place someone we care for in a state of behavioral depression when we deprive them of all the reinforcements, like the widow example. A widow living in a mansion, a woman living in a mansion with her husband is suddenly widowed. All of her reinforcements, the mansion, her husband tending to the bills to make her comfortable, all those are taken away, and then her brother decides to convince her to move to the city where she is less, I guess, it's easier to take care of herself in the city. she's much less, she's more low maintenance for him if she moves to the city. So that's an example of where depriving them of their reinforcements leads to severe behavioral depression. So surrender mechanism, this is when the condition suppression can be useful on occasion, converts behavioral suppression into successful avoidance. So a fighter who surrenders may lose out on the immediate prize, whether it's money or a trophy, but ultimately avoids disaster, which is getting severely beaten. So the white flag brings mercy, and that is more, that's preferable to not getting beaten up is more preferable than getting a trophy. So this part of the chapter talks about combat battle fatigue. So a result of neglecting behavioral contingencies can lead to this illness. Psychiatric casualties is a serious result of making the suppression adaptive and leads to manpower loss in the armed forces. And so combat fatigue is defined as constant threats of suffering and death, burdened with the necessity to kill others, often leading to depression. This usually does not happen on the battlefield, but between lulls, when they're like reforming their groups and changing plans and stuff like that. The treatment is to pull the fighters out of the front lines and into a base hospital, where the probable outcome is a disability discharge. In this scenario, combat fatigue is a conditioned suppression serving as a combat avoidance. So the conclusion and vital note, anxiety of unavoidable shocks, threats can be tricky, but according to the lab rat experiments, even rats are able to adapt to frequent warning signals better than the infrequent ones. This is because they continue to work productively in the small block of time that they are given, rather than dwelling on their anxiety. Ultimately, when there is an inescapable punishment coming, its warning signs can result in distress, anxiety, and some form of incapacitation. This condition suppression is a major cause of what most people experience as the anxiety they get treated for by psychiatric and pharmacologic remedies. So was there ever a specific time you remember where an unavoidable threat made you temporarily incapacitated or gave you anxiety? The one that I can remember is when I was little, I used to be terrified of thunderstorms. And there was one instance where I was on the bus coming home from camp, and there was a tornado watch or warning out, and it looked just like the end of the world outside. And I had this irrational fear of lightning and thunder. So for the entire bus ride home, I was completely useless. I could not function. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't be on my phone. I couldn't read my book. I couldn't do anything. I was in such a state of intense anxiety that I was completely incapacitated because of the unavoidable threat of a thunderstorm or a tornado. It ended up being a pretty bad thunderstorm, but by the time I got home, it was already over. So that was my experience. Thanks, guys.